record. Unless you just hear my child grunting. Welcome to Transactions 101. So Miss Haley is an awesome agent, and of course we know her as our favorite residential photographer, but she's also done tons of transaction coordination, which I don't know if Elias knows more about that, or if you want to just share a little bit about your background really quick.
Yeah, so I previously worked for a real estate team here in Idaho Falls, and I was exclusively their transaction coordinator. And so, I mean, in addition to the photography, things like that I would do for them, but I've closed probably over 1,000 transactions over 4 years. So I've seen pretty much everything.
Yeah, so you are definitely the expert, which is why we had you do this. It was Elias's idea, so I blame him.
Yeah.
But anyways,
Yeah,
so
well,
we love you. And Peggy, I guess if you have questions, just let us know. And then as people hop on, I'll make sure that they stay muted. But we are recording for YouTube so people can watch it later. And we're just going to go ahead and get started. Elias, is there anything else that you wanted to say before she starts?
No, I'm just I'm excited, and I'm here to help any way that I can, but I'm just excited to learn as well. So
yeah, Elias needs it. He is a mess with that. He does. That's why he hires a TC though, because some of us just don't have the time to do the things we need to. But thank you so much for walking us through it, Haley, and we'll let you get started.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you. Okay. I kind of just wanted to walk through the contract, like the purchase and sale agreement, and go through things as we get to them. So let me pull up a blank form here really quick, just so I can look at it. Okay. And is there a way I can share my screen? Do you know, do I have that ability? So I may be able to show it. If not, I can just kind of walk through it.
I just selected that you can share. So if you don't see a share option, let me know.
Not seeing one.
I might have to make her the host.
Let's see how I can do that. Make host. Okay. There you go, Missy. Tell me if that worked.
One second. Yeah, I'm not seeing a share screen. Maybe it could just be on my end.
Oh, weird. No, I just made you the host, so it should be on there. But I also selected that multiple people could share at the same time, so I'm not quite sure, but maybe Elias can pull up a contract for you.
I can do that for you, Haley.
Can you, Elias,
Yeah, either way.
do you have the ability to share your screen, Elias?
I do.
Okay, I wonder why Haley can't. That's weird.
It could be because I'm on a browser instead of like in a Zoom app, but I don't know.
Oh, who knows? Well, do you want Elias to pull up a contract then, and then you can tell him where to go or what to say or where to, scroll?
Yeah, either way. It's just, I mean, if the participants want to pull up their own, then I've got one here as well that we can
sounds
kind of read
good.
through.
Maybe Elias pull up an RE21 and share it, and then you can just start talking. And if people want to pull up an RE21, do you want it filled out or just a blank one? Like maybe a recent
Just a
one?
blank one is
Just a blank
perfect.
one. Okay, go for it.
Okay, so the purchase and sale agreement obviously is what you're going to get when you receive an offer on your home, whether as a buyer or a seller. So as a buyer, you're going to be the one filling this out. As a seller, you're the one that is receiving it. First thing people tend to look at is the purchase price, because I mean, we all want to know how much money the buyer is willing to bring to the table. So we're going to kind of just go through these. I'll pop in different things as we get through the transaction process. And then if you guys have any questions, just let me know. Just raise your hand, pause me, unmute yourself, and ask me a question. So right under the purchase and sale agreement, or right under the purchase price, excuse me, on line item 2, you'll see this offer is contingent upon the sale, refinance, and or closing of any other property. You're going to want to check this box, whether yes or no, if you're receiving this offer contingent, and if so, is there, what are the details? You know, is it already listed? Is it not? Are they planning on listing it soon? A lot of times this can be a make or break for buyers and sellers. So just make sure that you're reviewing that. Earnest money, you're going to want to make sure that all of these boxes are checked, obviously. Do your due diligence. Earnest money, I've heard, don't put in, if you're representing the buyer, I wouldn't put in anything higher than 5,000 because that's what you can bring to small claims court. But anything below that, I've heard you can do, you know, a certain percentage of the sales price. You can have it tiered so that if it's like an offer under 200,000, you're going to put $500 down. If it's, you know, 300,000, you'll put 1,000. It's kind of up to you what you want to put there. Obviously, with more earnest money, your offer does look stronger. Responsible broker. Here we have Elias. You're going to want to make sure that his name is in there. And then all cash offer, yes or no. If they are bringing cash to the table, this is super important. This part right here where it says buyer agrees to provide seller within blank business days. So that's, sorry, Elias. I'm like trying to look at mine and yours at the same time. Okay. Within that number of days, you want to have a proof of funds. So whether that's coming from their retirement account, whether that's coming from just a standard bank account, whether they've got assets that they're planning on liquidating, they need to have a proof of funds for you within that number of business days. I have had deals fall apart before where they did not provide proof of funds, and it actually ended up being like a scammer. We had him twice on 2 transactions, and they were both really high dollar homes where they claimed that it was an all cash offer and we could never get proof of funds from them. And one of them, they kind of like strung us along and had us, you know, we were like, hey, proof of funds, proof of funds, proof of funds. And then once that 5 days hit, the sellers were like, yeah, we're done. Like, we don't want to deal with them anymore. And then the second one, I noticed the name was the same as the buyer on our previous listing. So that's how we caught that. But within whatever amount of business days, you want to make sure that they are providing proof of funds. And then same thing with new loan proceeds. So, oh, and then cash proceeds from another sale, sorry, right above that on item C, whether or not they are bringing funds from another sale. So if it's not contingent, they may have, you know, this may be closing in 2 days and they're just planning on having that. Either way, you're going to want to make sure that one of those is checked. And then new loan proceeds, that's how much they're taking out. So if they have a down payment of $100,000 on a $200,000 property, your new loan proceeds are going to be $100,000 minus your earnest money that you're putting down. First loan, you guys know the drill here, FHA, VA, conventional, whatever it may be. And then interest rate, make sure that you are speaking with your buyer's lender. It's important to know what the interest rates are. You don't want to have this number be 4 when the interest rate is 4.25 and your buyer really wants the house, because that could make or break the deal. So underneath that, oh, and then if they're doing a second loan, same thing. Underneath that, the loan application. So the buyer has applied or shall apply for the loan. In this market, they better have applied for a loan. You need to make sure that your buyers are prepared. So again, within blank business days, you need to have a proof of application, basically saying that your lender has approved it. Lenders will give you 2 kinds of approvals. They'll do a pre-approval and a pre-qualification. There's a difference between the two. I'm sure you've heard this before. A pre-approval will show you all of the things that are here on this purchase and sale agreement. So you want to make sure that they've got the approval of a credit report, income verification, debt ratios, evidence of sufficient funds, and make sure that all of that is in writing in your pre-approval. If it is not, you are not meeting these requirements within the 10 business days or whatever you put there for business days. And from what I understand, the seller does have the right to terminate the transaction if you don't have that loan application within that certain amount of time. Things may have changed. It's been a while since I've been a transaction coordinator, but if you don't have a pre-approval within that time frame, things could get kind of sticky for you. So we'll scroll down to additional financial terms. That's basically if you've got anything else that you're wanting to put in there, you put it in there. And then approximate funds due from buyers at closing. So again, when we were up at the loan amount, you got, $100,000 that they're putting down on a $200,000 house. They're loaning $100,000. They're putting $100,000 down. They've already put down the $5,000 in earnest money. So this right here would be $95,000, just as a quick example. And then right here, you're going to want to see right under that approximate funds due from buyers at closing, if such written confirmation required in 3B or 3D is not received by the sellers within the strict time allotted, sellers may at their option cancel this agreement by notifying buyers. So if your contract is not watertight, if you don't have that pre-approval letter, if you don't have the proof of funds, that's right there in that thing that the sellers will have this amount of days to cancel the contract. So you want to make sure that your contracts are watertight, and make sure that you've got all of your paperwork in a timely manner, because you will probably at some point in your real estate career, if you haven't already, you will have a buyer or a seller that comes to you and says, I put this offer in on this house, or we received this offer and I want out. Get me out. I don't want this house anymore. With the buyer, it's a little bit easier because they do have that inspection contingency. With a seller, this is usually your way out. And this isn't to teach you how to play hardball against other agents. This is just to represent your clients in the best way possible. You have to know each of these deadlines, and you have to know the ins and outs of the contract. So how do you get your seller out? If your buyer has not provided proof of funds, that is one way to do that. Again,
There was a lot of examples of agents exercising, the last 2 years, exercising outs like these, because as agents, sometimes we don't pay as close attention as we should. But last year, you'd get an offer under contract in one day and then a backup offer for more, a couple days later, and agents would try to exercise their outs. And you have outs throughout the entire contract. And something like this is an out for the seller.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, in this market where it's kind of cutthroat, it's important to know each and every one of those things. So the satisfaction and removal of all contract contingencies, we're going to want to make sure that everything is, so unless specifically stated below, so like the inspection contingencies coming up, all contingencies should be removed or exercised no later than blank business days. So make sure that you're putting that in. Other terms and conditions. This is often where people put in, there's a hole in the master bedroom wall. We want that fixed. There's, a giant leak in the kitchen and we want that fixed. So sometimes you will find those things here because you can see them as you're showing the home. Whereas like inspection contingency items, sometimes those are things that are kind of hidden. And so you'll have the two separate things. Other terms and conditions could also be like seller to leave playset, or seller to allow, buyers to move in earlier, whatever that may be. There's another spot in the contract for that. But other terms and conditions, basically anything that you're asking for that isn't already stated in the contract, or if you want to be redundant and put it in here, even if it is stated in the contract somewhere else, that's where you would put it. So items included and excluded, this is often where you'll find the appliances. And then it's important to note what is included in the purchase price via the contract. So Elias, if you'll scroll up just a little bit there. Thank you. So these are all of the things that by contract are supposed to be left in the home. So floor coverings, wall mounts, satellite dishes, attached plumbing, bathroom lighting fixtures. So sometimes you'll have sellers that are a little bit bitter and they'll try and take things like this. And by contract, they're agreeing to leave, window coverings, exterior trees, water heaters, things like that. So everything here listed in item 6 right before item A is supposed to be left regardless of what's included and excluded down below in items A and B.
One thing, sorry, Haley, one thing
go
I've
ahead.
seen with this one recently, and it happened up north actually. If there's 2 refrigerators, one in the kitchen and one in the garage, and you want the one in the kitchen, specify you want the one in the kitchen, because we had a seller take the new one in the kitchen and leave the old one in the garage. So
Yes. Yeah. Be very specific. Anytime anything comes up like that, be very specific about what you're wanting. So that there's no confusion as to which one. And in court, if this was presented in court, the judge could say, well, they left a fridge, like no big deal. So be very, very specific about what you're asking for. Okay, if you'll scroll down just a little bit more, page 3. We kind of skip through all of these things usually, but just know like any mineral rights are owned by the seller. Water rights, usually you have to transfer water rights separately, but sometimes, they're included, blah, blah, blah. We'll get through that. So, and these are very rare. I find these probably 1 in every 100 transactions did we have one that was dealing with mineral rights or water rights. So just know if you're selling a home with water rights that you are making sure that those are passed. So sometimes those are via certificate. I know that there's different companies that handle water rights. So I think New Sweden is one of them. But if you have water rights on the property, just make sure that those certificates are being passed unless otherwise agreed upon. And then same thing with farm. So 7, 8, and 9, you're going to kind of deal with all the same. Title conveyance and title insurance. So one thing that I think is super important that's often skipped over is a title commitment. So Elias, do you happen to have one? Sorry, I had one in hopes that I would be able to share my screen, but
a title?
A title commitment?
Yes, let me get one here. I have to share a different part of my screen. Actually, no, that was the right one.
While we're waiting for that, I'll just tell you guys about a couple of instances where we had title actually be a deal breaker. So the title commitment is super important. I know often we'll get these and we'll just be like, okay, great. But I caught one at one point that had $30,000 in HOA liens, and the seller had no idea. So when we pulled it up, it was stated on the title commitment as an exemption, and the seller was like, well, I can't sell my house because I don't have $30,000 in equity to be able to pay off those liens. So she ended up having to keep the home, work on paying off those liens until she could resell it. Another instance was an easement that was caught where the buyer thought that she had a lot more land than she actually had because there was an easement running through it. that basically cut her backyard in half. And so you want to make sure that you're checking all of those items just to ensure that those things don't happen. Another big one is HOA. We had one buyer that was interested in having an in-home preschool and purchased the home, was super excited. It was perfect for an in-home preschool, realized that the HOA didn't allow it. So these are all things that you'll find in your title commitment. So if you want to scroll down, Elias, for me.
We had a Twin Falls agent find a house that had $3 million worth of IRS liens on it.
Oh my
they're
gosh, yeah.
definitely important to look.
Yes. So all of these first things are just kind of what you're going to see in a standard title commitment. Often it's just title's explanation of what this notice is, what their commitment to the buyer and seller is, whatever else may be. So that's all you're going to find on these first ones. So Schedule A, this is where you're going to look up, if you'll just pause there, Elias, you'll go up a little bit. Schedule A, there we go. You want to make sure that when you're, the grid on, I think it's page 4 or 5 of the purchase and sale agreement, that's where you're going to want to check and make sure that these are correct. So the seller's standard policy and the buyer's extended policy, you'll see that on items 2A and B here. If you want to explain to your seller what a standard title policy is, basically, when we get a standard insurance like car insurance, we're insuring the future. So we are ensuring that if we get in an accident, the insurance will cover it. Or, if our house burns down, the insurance will cover it, heaven forbid. But the title insurance actually insures backwards. So they're saying if we missed something from this transaction, this title insurance covers it. So if we didn't realize that the vested people were actually, had they passed away and probate wasn't done, that's something that standard title insurance would cover. So if you're trying to explain that to your sellers, that's what they're paying for in their standard coverage, is in case title misses anything, it's not going to come back and bite you in the butt once the closing is done. Excuse me. So then we'll carry on. You're going to want to make sure, sorry, Elias, will you go up just one more time? Item 4 here, you want to make sure that those vested are correct. So if the vested person, like this one, has passed away, you're going to want to make sure that the people that have the ability to sell, so in this case, Betty has passed away, Rebecca is personal representative of said estate. You want to make sure that you are dealing with Rebecca. You don't want to you want to make sure that it's not just like Rebecca's brother that has stepped in and is now trying to sell the home for Betty, when they in fact do not have the ability to do that. So check and make sure that whoever title is vested in, that is matching your purchase and sale agreement. And then double check your legal exhibit. You want to make sure that that is correct. Sometimes you'll see that the exhibit is incorrect. You just want to reach out to title, make sure they correct that so that they're actually insuring the correct lot, or correct property. If you want to keep scrolling down. Okay, so Schedule B1 is just basically all of the requirements that they have. I think Alliances is a little bit different. Well, they're all different. So this is just a basic overview of all of them. You'll find these items on all of them. But if you want to continue to scroll down. And then typically, if you find you're looking for easements, things like that, you can find them in the links. So they had a link for the address there. Oftentimes, if you click that, it'll bring up like a plat map. If it doesn't bring up a plat map, it's usually in Schedule B2.
need an
So-
alliance title log in there.
Yeah. Schedule B2 is where you're going to find the nitty gritty things like I was describing. So something like an HOA lien, the HOA covenants, things like that. So if you want to scroll down just a little bit for me, Elias. So the deed of trust, we always check that. So that's the instrument, the instrument number that is linked. You're going to want to make sure that that deed of trust is not way above and beyond what the purchase price is. This was a problem back in like 2009, 10, 11. We were finding that people owed a significant amount more on their home than it was worth and than what they were trying to sell it for. So just make sure that that deed of trust is lower than what their purchase price is, or double check with the seller and make sure that they don't still owe that amount. So the deed of trust is basically what they loaned on when they initially purchased the home. So if they purchased this, obviously this one's back in 97, they probably don't owe anything anymore on it. But in that instance, that was just an example of people purchasing a home at a higher purchase price than what it may be worth now. So, and then number 16, possible encroachments. So you're going to want to check on a plat map. So where they haven't included a plat map here, I would go back to title and say, hey, do you have a plat map that shows any easements? So that I can double check those. Easements are basically a right to the land. So you'll often find utilities easements. Those ones are really common and really not something to worry about because they typically run where the sidewalk is. So you may have a home that has, you know, a 10-foot driveway and sidewalk, and that utility easement will just kind of run either in the front or the back of the home. Those are super common, not something to worry about. Do make sure that your buyers are aware of them because sometimes they'll try and like park their RV on the sidewalk, which isn't allowed. They have to have, the utilities companies has to have rights and access to those pieces of land where those easements are. Something that has typically a larger easement are canals. You'll find that canal companies have about 20 feet on each side of the canal. Sometimes it's a little less, sometimes it's only about 10, but I have seen them up to about 20 feet on both sides of the canal. So if you have a canal running through the property, chances are that the seller only owns or is only, easements are tricky. The seller owns the property, but the canal company has the right to those 10 or 20 feet of land on either side at any time based on the easement agreement. So you can often find those as well in the title commitment. So if there's an easement, ask them what the agreement is. You'll often find it's like a dotted line on your plat maps.
Haley, one thing I'm learning about canals and easements. So we bought 50 acres that we're developing, and there's 2 canals that run on the land, and they're different companies that own them. We're going to move the canal, which is proving to be a little bit of a challenge, but I'm learning that these canal companies are like the Bloods and the Crips. Like they hate each other. They don't like each other. Like one company said they'd rather dump their water into the river than try to share something with them. So that stuff's important to like kind of pay attention to. We had another one where Bingham County wouldn't give a building permit unless the sellers built a bridge across the canal, and then they had to get that approved by Road and Bridge and the canal company. So I gotta tell you, I appreciate you going through the title commitment, because that's something that I think, you know, a lot of agents, I mean, I was like 4 years into my career when finally someone was like, hey, you really need to look at these. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, so thank you for going through one of these with us.
Yeah. And yeah, title, I've found in, at least in my experience, title is so helpful, and they're more than willing to get you that information. So just ask them, like, if you have questions about title commitments, in my experience, they were more than happy to help me because they realized that like I was doing my due diligence and that both parties would be happy at the end of the transaction knowing these. So it is, I mean, it's so important for you representing your clients to understand these items because they're looking to you as the expert. Okay, you can, I think that's typically the end of alliances, title commitments. So yeah, we'll just pop back over. So if you want to scroll up just a little bit for me on, so under item 11, you'll have sorry, my dog is barking. You can probably hear her. So the preliminary title commitment and the CC&Rs. So within blank number of business days, the seller or the buyer shall firm commitment. So check that, make sure that you've got that within that time frame, because the buyer shall have blank number of days after receipt of the preliminary commitment and CC&Rs to double check that. So let's say that the preliminary title commitment, let's say that this is 15 business days and you're already outside of your inspection period. This allows you to double check all of those items and make sure that the CC&Rs are correct. The HOA is going to be, kosher, whatever. So double check all of your deadlines here. Title company, pretty straightforward. Standard owner coverage, this is what I was talking about before, where you're insuring the past. And then the extended coverage lender's policy. So this one is just a requirement by the mortgage company. Every mortgage will need to have a lender's policy in place. So let's scroll down to the inspection. Whether or not they want to conduct an inspection, you just check the boxes there. And then you want to double check your timeframes very closely here. So the seller agrees to make the property available no later than blank business days. You'll find that right under item 12. Here the blank is 2 if left blank. And so that means that they have to get all the utilities turned on, and sometimes the utilities will take a while. So you want to make sure that if you're selling a property that doesn't currently have the utilities on, you want to make sure to get those on within the 2 business days of the inspection so that they have time to turn on the water and lights and everything to make sure that they all work. And then if it's a short sale, you're gonna just check that box there. We don't see a lot of those anymore. Who knows, maybe we will in the future here. If you want to scroll up just a little bit for me, sorry, Elias.
Okay, I get eager.
Yeah. So part B, this is where you'll find the amount of time that the buyer has to complete the inspection. So whether it's 5, 10, 7, whatever business days to actually complete the inspection and deliver an inspection contingency report. This is super important, and I can't tell you how many times somebody has brought in an inspection contingency late and our seller said, never mind, and they took the earnest money, which they had every right to do at that point because this deadline was not met. So if you have 5 business days here, you need to ensure that your inspection is done within 5 business days and that you have that inspection contingency to the seller with receipt before 5 p.m. on that deadline day. If you want to scroll down a little bit now, we have secondary inspections. So this was actually added a couple years ago. I guess it's been probably a few years now where they actually have a separate spot for well and septic inspections, survey inspections, whatever else. So you can put that in as a separate inspection now, whereas before it was just kind of like willy-nilly whenever you got to it. Now they have set deadlines for those as well. If you want to scroll down just a little bit, I'm just going to summarize this part for you guys. So you'll see the blanks here in item 3 and 4. So the buyer agrees to give notice to the seller within a specific amount of time. So let's say your inspection period is 5 business days. They get the inspection done on the 4th business day. They submit an inspection contingency notice to the seller on the 5th business day before 5 p.m. From there, the seller has two options. They can either, okay, let me back up. The buyer has three options. They can submit an inspection contingency report, or they can submit a termination. So the inspection contingency, they can either accept the property as is, request a purchase price adjustment, request a credit at closing, or request repairs to be done. So the seller, once they receive that, if let's say they're moving forward with it and they have repairs that they'd like to ask for, the seller then has this number of business days to respond. So that's your blank in item number 3. So let's say that they have where things are moving kind of quick. Let's say they only have 2 business days. So the seller can either accept to do the repairs, or submit a different inspection contingency that says which repairs they're willing to complete, or give a credit to the buyer, reduce the purchase price, whatever that may be. This is the part that a lot of people get tripped up on, is after the seller submits that secondary inspection contingency, or anything that's not just signing off on the buyer's original inspection contingency, the buyer has blank business days. So let's say 2 again. The buyer has 2 business days to either accept what the seller has proposed or terminate the agreement. A lot of times you will see this back and forth, where it's like, we'll agree to these 3 repairs, but not these 2. And the buyer's like, okay, but will you do 4 of these repairs, but not this one? And if those are not done within this specific time frame, one of these parties has an out. So let's say the buyer requested that the sprinklers be fixed and the refrigerator be fixed. And the seller says, okay, we will fix the refrigerator, but we're not going to fix the sprinklers. The buyer then can say, okay, I'm out, or okay, that's fine. They don't really have a time period for back and forth. So if the buyer doesn't accept what the seller's proposing, they move forward. And if after that deadline has completed, the buyer at that time, let's say 2 business days has passed, it's now the 3rd business day, and the buyer is like, oh, I want them to fix both, so I don't want to be a part of this transaction anymore. At that point, the seller does have rights to that earnest money if the buyer terminates. So be very, very careful about those deadlines. I know that's all kind of a lot of information at once. Basically, what you need to know is that there's really no contractual back and forth. It's the buyer submits a request, the seller either agrees to the request, modifies the request, or the buyer can accept the request or back out. So those are like the 3 time frames. It's not a back and forth kind of thing. So be very careful about it. It's easier to go verbally within those 2 time frames rather than trying to do a back and forth on paperwork and then submitting your final negotiation through a piece of paper. Does that all make sense? Does anybody have questions about that? So that was kind of a lot at one time. Just unmute yourself if you have any questions. Yell at me. Okay. I'll move forward. If you guys think of anything, just hop on and let me know. Okay, lead-based paint. You guys know anything before 1979 is lead-based paint. It's target housing. You need a lead-based paint disclosure. Whether or not the buyer will waive or not waive the right to a lead-based paint test is totally up to them. You can check that here. So whether or not item 13, subject property is or is not defined as target housing. So it is if it was built before 1979, regardless of if there's been updates done, regardless of if it was taken, down to the studs, whatever. It's still target housing if it was built before 1979. The buyer, and then you'll see a couple lines down from that, D, the buyer waives or does not waive the right. So I always put does not waive the right to have a test just because it allows them to have a test at any time during the inspection period. But if they're like, yeah, no, it's no big deal while you're writing the offer, then you can put waives. Okay, if you'll scroll down a little bit more. Mold disclaimer, you guys know the drill. Buyers basically advised that if there's mold and they don't have an inspection done on it, then, you know, the buyer is holding the seller harmless from any liability or damages related to mold. Square footage and boundary verification. This is the buyer's responsibility, or in this case, buyer's agent, because you guys are awesome and you're representing your buyers. So make sure that you're verifying square footage and any boundaries. Right to farm, you guys know it. Seller's property condition disclosure. So in a property disclosure, you want to make sure that you are checking everything in there. So this basically just says, have they looked at it prior to filling out this offer? Depending on whether or not it was uploaded into the MLS, you're going to check yes or no. And then as soon as you get that offer put together, or even prior to, you're going to request that property disclosure form. Check that, go through it, make sure that you are looking at everything. And that's often a good place to find things that you can ask your inspector to double check. So let's say that there's, you know, a sprinkler valve that's broken. You can, and it's stated in the property disclosure form, you can tell your buyer's inspector, hey, will you double check and make sure which sprinkler valve is it? What do you think needs to be done on it? Should we get a sprinkler inspection from a landscaper, whatever that may be? That just helps you be more involved in the process so that your buyer knows that, like, hey, I'm looking out for you. I'm checking everything I'm doing everything that I can do in order to make sure that we have all of the information on this house that we need. Homeowners association, oftentimes these are kind of hard to find, like the fees that are associated with it. Title will sometimes have them. Otherwise, have your seller talk to their homeowners association and get those fees and those set up. Sometimes you can find them in the CC&Rs. Sometimes the CC&Rs are outdated and the amounts won't be correct. Whatever it may be, you want to make sure that you have the most up-to-date information. And oftentimes I've found that the HOA will charge extra fees if you need to pull paperwork from them. But if the seller has like the latest bill or whatever, you can forego those fees. So talk to the title company about the HOA and see what the most cost-effective way to go about that is, because sometimes there are fees that aren't necessary that are thrown in there by the HOA that you don't actually need to go that route, if that makes sense. Okay, the grid. The grid will vary based on what kind of financing the buyer has. So if they are a cash buyer, often all of these will be either NA or a buyer cost, except for the standard coverage insurance. If you have a VA loan, then a lot of these are going to be seller costs. If you have an FHA loan, a lot of these are going to be seller costs. If you have an RD loan, a lot of them are going to be seller. If you have a conventional, a lot of them are going to be shared equally or buyer. So double check, make sure each of these are correct. And oftentimes you will have a lender that is overlooking this or looking over this, and your buyer may be a VA buyer, and they may say, okay, I need you to actually change this flood certification tracking fee to a seller cost instead of a buyer or a shared equally, because by law, the VA does not allow the buyer to pay that. So the seller has to. Double check with your mortgage company. If you have a favorite lender, talk to them and ask them, what are standard check boxes for these items that I should be looking at for each loan type. I know at our group previously that I worked at, we actually had like little laminated cards that had, okay, if it's a VA, these are the boxes that are typically checked. If it's FHA, these are the boxes that are typically checked. So your lenders can get you those in that bit of information and make sure that you have what you need there. That way you can explain that to your buyer or your seller. Like, look, they're asking us to pay this tax service fee. That's because it's a VA loan. So, and it's often in your favor to know how much those are. So a tax service fee is typically $85. A flood certification fee is often $25. Just knowing some of those items prior to will help kind of ease your seller, especially if it's a VA loan. I know that a lot of VA loans right now are complaining that what am I trying to say? Their sellers are complaining that they're having to pay more fees for the buyer because it's a VA loan. Just explain those. So like a tax service fee, it's $85. Flood certification, and you can ask title and your mortgage company what these fees may be up front so that you can explain that better to them, so that they have a better idea of what that may be. Okay, Elias, if you want to scroll down for me. Okay, right underneath the grid, sorry. This is where you'll find whether or not the buyer is asking the seller to pay any concessions. So these are your closing costs. Again, talk to your lender, figure out how much closing costs are. If you're going to want the seller to pay all of the closing costs, you're going to need to know that information. Often you'll see that they'll put 3% here when in fact they may be only paying 2.5%. That leaves money on the table for the seller. So the buyer could be upset. I've seen that happen before where the seller agreed to pay 3% of the closing costs, but it came out to 2%. And then the buyer's like, well, I want that money. They're not entitled to it at that point because they agreed to pay basically up to 3% of the purchase price as a concession. And then lender required repairs, 0 if it's a cash offer. There's not going to be a lender. You'll often find with an FHA, VA, and RD loan that there are appraisals where a lender required repair costs may come in. So if there's peeling paint, if there's an outdated knob and tube wiring, whatever it may be, the seller agrees to pay up to this amount to help fix those items from the appraisal.
A good place to put like the cost of a roof if you know that a roof is going to be, needing replaced for FHA or VA.
Yeah. And then this one's often missed, but make sure you check the box on whether or not they intend to occupy the property as the primary residence. If the buyer intends to use this as an Airbnb or a rental, and they do not intend to occupy the property as a primary residence, their taxes will be different. So make sure that you're checking those so that we know up front at closing, the lender knows, okay, the taxes are going to be different. It's going to affect their pre-qualification, etc. Walkthroughs, seller has to leave the home in so they changed this a while back too, and I kind of forgot about it, but there's a first walkthrough and a second walkthrough that is now in the contract. So the first walkthrough is basically after the completion of the inspection repairs. Second walkthrough is within a certain time frame of closing. So often people will do these in the same amount of time, just at their final walkthrough. You can do that if you'd like to. But if your buyer would like to know, okay, they just completed the inspection and we still have 15 days to closing, can we go in and look at and make sure that all of those repairs are done correctly? That would be your first walkthrough time. Okay, you can scroll down a little bit more for me. All of these are basically just definitions. So read through those if you don't know them already. They'll talk about the difference between a business day and a calendar day. Business day defined as 8 to 5. So even if you're working, 9 to 5:30, that doesn't mean that your inspection contingency can be turned in at 5:30 on your deadline day. It's 5 o'clock.
This is a huge line right here. The first business day shall be the first business day after the date of execution. I get asked that a lot. When does it start? It's the day after we all execute. And execution is both parties signed and it's been delivered to the opposing party. So
correct. And yeah, more definitions. Make sure that you know these. Okay, representation confirmation, the A, B, C, and D. Do you guys know what these mean? So basically, A, you have a buyer and you're working as an agent for the buyer. That would be if the other agent is not a part of your brokerage. So let's say I'm working with a buyer as a HomeSmart agent, and I've got an offer turned into a seller that's got a Keller Williams agent. Both of those would be marked as A. B is in the case that you have a team. So in the past, when I worked for a team, if we had the seller, one of our agents on our team was working with the seller, and then another agent on our team was working with the buyer, that's what B is for. C is if you're working with the same brokerage. So I've got a buyer at HomeSmart. The seller is represented by HomeSmart, but not on the same team. So let's say that, you know, I'm working with Ivory's, and I've got a buyer and she's got a seller. We're both HomeSmart agents, but we're not working on the same team together. So we both have an assigned agent. So that would be C. And then D is if you're acting as a non-agent. You're basically just doing the paperwork for them. You don't have an agreement with them through compensation agreements or whatever you choose. So that is what D is for. Closing, make sure that you know the closing date is no later than blank. So this is another deadline where if your buyer or seller cannot commit to a closing date and they one of the parties wants out, the closing date is the closing date. And if you can't meet that, that is a way out as well. I actually had a personal transaction that they kept wanting to push closing out, and I was the buyer. And so, Ivory's, yes, B is also for when you're representing both parties. So up on those representation confirmations again. So if you yourself are selling a home, or you yourself are working with a seller selling a home, and then you bring the buyer, that is also what B is for. So yes, but closing date, I personally had a house where it was a new construction and they kept pushing off closing and closing and closing, and it was like months. And I was like, look, if you can't close by this date, we have to find a different house. Like I can't keep pushing this off. So I had every right to back out at that time because the closing date was missed. Thankfully, that didn't happen and we were able to come to an agreement, but that was the case with that one. Possession, double check this. We have had people before where they want to move in early, and the seller's agent missed this, even though we put it in the contract that the seller had agreed to it. And they wanted to move in like 2 days early. And then the seller was like, well, hey, like we don't want people in our house 2 days early because we're still moving out. So double check that, make sure that the possession is when you want it. Prorations, basically make sure that anything prorated is as of the closing date or a different date. And then propane tanks. I don't know why that's like its own little thing here, but if there's propane in the tank, you want to make sure that that is either reimbursed by the buyer or the seller has agreed to just leave all of it there.
And I believe that's based on the current fuel tank price, not what was paid before, if I remember right.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, my dog's barking again. Assignment. You may have heard of wholesalers that like to flip contracts. I don't know the ins and outs of how they do it, but basically they will check that it may be otherwise assigned. This could also be in the case of maybe you're purchasing a home, but your parents are helping you out with it, and the lender has decided that you can't be on the contract and that your parents have to buy it. That would also be a spot where the contract could be reassigned to your parents. So may or may not be. Again, this is super important. I have had a deal where the assignment was not allowed to be sold, transferred, or otherwise assigned. And the sellers wanted to back out and the buyer couldn't perform on the contract any longer. And so they had the right to back out because the person that's now named as the buyer on the contract can't transfer the contract to anybody else. And that named person could no longer perform on the contract. So, and then acceptance, make sure that your acceptance times, give them a little bit of time to accept contracts. I know that sometimes it's hard in this market where you're like, I want you to accept this by, 10 a.m. and it's 9:56. And you just want people to, move quickly, but do give them a little bit of time so that they have time to at least look through your contract. And then make sure your signatures down below are all before that time. Otherwise, you're going to need a counteroffer or an addendum to fix that. So, yeah, that's pretty much the contract. And then just, yeah, I don't know if anybody else has any questions.
No, honestly, this was incredible. So thank you. I think we dove deep into that contract, the process, and even the title commitment, which I think this is going to be huge for not only the newer agents that hopped in now that aren't familiar with Idaho contracts, but any new agent. I think this is valuable. So thank you, Haley. I really appreciate you doing this for us today.
Yeah.
We do have another training session on lead follow-up coming up at 10. For those of you that need to get a hold of Haley for anything, photos, just reach out to her. You can find them on, I believe, Facebook, Instagram. Look them up though. Thank you, Haley. Again, I appreciate you guys. And I think we have a couple of chats there. Just some thank yous. So awesome.
Thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Cool. Well, I'm not exactly sure how this is going to work, so I'm going to go ahead and end this meeting so it ends the recording, and then Kelly will get the new one fired up on lead follow-up, taught by Joe and Jade, who are incredible producers in a year that has some twists and turns with interest rates. They're doing better than they were last year, and they had a phenomenal year last year. So excited to learn from them. Thanks, Haley, and thank you everybody for hopping onto this one.
Thanks, guys.